You are now listening to the Counterflow podcast, a place for dissonant voices and unapproved opinions.
You get split in half, but I call the hologram graph. But I am the center inside the placenta of math. You clash with cyanide gas and die fast. Rhythmical equivalent of solids, liquid, and gas. We smash your sinus with the power of Lord Titus. But I am the virus inside of the iris of Cyrus.
Here is your host and humble narrator, Buck Johnson.
What's up, you guys? Welcome back once again to the Counterflow podcast. As always, I am your host and humble narrator, Buck Johnson, and I couldn't be more excited to bring you this episode with Father Deacon Ananias. I've been wanting him on for quite some time. Our schedules are finally lining up, and this is a very good subject. He's the man on this subject, let's put it that way. There's a book I bought, last year, I guess, put out by the publishing company that Father Peter Heers owns, and it is called Let No One Fear Death. Orthodox Christian leaders respond to the COOF challenge. It doesn't say that word COOF, but you understand why I'm saying it that way. There's a great chapter in there by Father Deacon Ananias, and it talks about Gnosticism, Scientism, the cult worship of the quote-unquote experts, and we're going to dive into that topic today, and I think you're going to love this perspective. Father Deacon Ananias Sorem, PhD, is CEO, founder, and President of Patristic Faith. Let's get him on. It's been too long. He's a man of many names, but for the purposes of this, we're going to say, welcome, Father Deacon Ananias. How are you, sir?
Good. Wonderful to be here, finally.
Yeah, finally.
We're doing it. Mm-hmm.
Yes. We were talking about this right before we started recording. Give a quick recap for those who might be curious about Orthodox Montana and kind of what it was like this year and maybe kind of what our appetites for next year possibly.
Yeah, absolutely. So the most successful of the three conferences by far was this year. It just keeps getting better and better. This year's theme was Seek First the Kingdom of God, which, interesting enough, was the gospel reading this last Sunday from Matthew. And we had keynote speaker, His Grace, Bishop Maxim, who's officially taken on and endorsed the conference and even has that up on the Serbian Western Diocese website with a wonderful write-up, just how wonderful the conference was. I spoke. We also had John Heers from First Things Foundation. We had Patrick from Church of the Eternal Logos, and our own beloved, dear Father Turbo Qualls as well. It was just so amazing because I know that you have the kind of general theme about seek first the kingdom of God, but it was like everybody works synergistically. It's almost like it was conspired, like I'm going to write my paper like this and then you're going to follow up, but it wasn't. It was just kind of a gift of the Holy Spirit that everything kind of piggybacked on one another and further illumined the kind of theme in different areas. So it was just that, and combined with the monastery tour and all the fellowship and the great food, it really is giving the world a vision of what Orthodoxy in America can look like. And words really can't do it justice. Like we say about the Orthodox Church itself, come and see, come taste and see. You have to. And that's part of what the conference is about too, is that it's not, internet. It's real incarnational, face-to-face personal experiences. It's an ethos. Mm-hmm. It's a life with your brothers and sisters in Christ. And everybody walked away that much closer to the kingdom, I think, because of that.
That's really cool. Is there one already in the works being planned next year?
Yeah, I have to plan some. Yeah. It just has to get better and better.
Mm-hmm.
So
now
that's the down. That's the downside when they're so successful. It's like, I got to top.
Where would one fly into?
The cheapest place is Bozeman.
Okay.
And that's about an hour, 15 minutes from Butte. And it's a beautiful drive. It really is. And so what I try to do is that I know it costs money. Flights are a lot. I try to bring, use all my connections to bring all the other expenses down. We had a professional chef.
Oh.
I got deals through the hotels that are normally in the season. I think it was like $320 a night, got $98 a night.
Oh, wow. Okay.
I got free camping on one of our parishioners' ranches. So a lot of that, I just worked really hard to like, look, I know it's expensive, but it's worth it. You know, it's what is your salvation worth, right?
Right. Yeah.
But it really does help us. So anyways, it's nice to fly into Butte because you're right there, but it's more expensive. It's a small, tiny airport. It's great. But
okay.
Anyways, yeah.
Cool.
And we have the men's retreat coming up.
When is
August.
That? Okay.
August 11th to 13th. It's going to be less of a conference and more workshops and kind of one-on-ones. And it's a retreat. It's a men's retreat. It's really less kind of fancy. I'm really just going to dig into the whole kind of man stereotype. Like, we don't need it all nice and fancy, but we're going to have Father Hans with the Brotherhood, Paisios, Metropolitan Jonah, Abbot Trifon, and then Dr. Philip Mamalakis.
Wow. Okay. Very cool. I guess people can find out details at Patristic Faith.
Yeah.
Got it. Okay. Speaking of, I think Patristic Faith, did y'all know, this is Uncut Mountain Press. There was a book that came out, and I should preface this with, I have one strike already, and that's after two of them expired previously, so we will have to be careful with terms. I know you know what I'm talking about, but there's this book put out. I think Father Peter Heers is the one in charge of this, if I remember correctly.
That's his publishing company, yeah.
That's right, okay. And you have a wonderful writing in here. It's one of the chapters, and it's called, In Whom Do You Put Your Trust? An Orthodox Analysis of, we'll call it the COOF, Science. And so I wanted to get into this topic because you get in a lot to scientism. And I think we witnessed a lot of the worship of science and scientism over the last few years. First of all, let's lay the groundwork then. What is scientism? And then we'll dive into it from there.
Broadly speaking, I'd probably define scientism as the belief that either science provides the highest form of knowledge or the only type of knowledge. And it takes on a religious air to it. So, you know, you have devotees of scientists, you're the high priesthood of scientists, right? And really, more than just religious beliefs, I would say cult-like tactics. I can't remember offhand. There was somebody that kind of was investigating cults and was kind of going over like top 10 kind of red flags that something's a cult. But it's like love bombing, shaming. What were the other? identifiable kind of uniforms.
Ah, yes. The mask.
Various things. And this kind of, it was just, I think I go in there too, that those who actually were the first to propose scientism, Auguste Comte and Saint Simon, talked about socially engineering. And they talked about that it was religion. Like, we're going to have these religious elements in various kind of priestly class, and that the need for social pressure. And you see these kinds of tactics within cults. And so you see this in what I would say scientism too. Also isolating, you're not to talk to these people. Like us kind of versus them mentality, a superiority. I could go on, but those are kind of what you see in scientism.
I think prior to 2020, I would consider myself to be naive on maybe how I viewed. Well, I was an atheist, so that's definitely brings its naivete with it. But just on how I viewed society, for some reason, once this all went down, my mind was blown at how many people jumped at it so hard that they're, like you said, they're alienating like me. We don't talk to those people or don't go around those people. Were you disappointed? I guess you were disappointed, but were you surprised at how many people jumped all in on the scientism aspect of this?
Yes and no. I mean, you're kind of like surprised at that many people. I'm also surprised at people that stood up against it too. but yeah, I mean, you don't, until you get something like that, you just don't see that, right? There's no reason why somebody's kind of underlying beliefs in whom they put their trust would kind of surface for you to see until you get kind of a crisis like that.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought that was actually kind of a good thing, is that particularly within the church, that you thought, well, some people have some different, maybe they have different political ideas or something like that. And, y'all can agree to disagree on various issues. I'm not talking about like dogma and stuff like that, but you know what I mean? Various issues, from science to medicine to politics. And then it wasn't until this came up that I started to realize these two groups are incompatible.
Mm-hmm.
They're incommensurate. Like there's no kind of negotiating, and there was kind of the no room to talk or dialogue and work this stuff out. And it made me start thinking, why? Like, because I didn't see that. In times past, you could go to the coffee hour and talk various stuff and disagree, but this really was the most divisive. It was, you're in this camp or you're in that camp.
Mm-hmm.
And like I said, they were incommensurate. So I was surprised about that. And it was just, what's the term I want to use? Kind of latent. It was just hidden. You just didn't know until that came up. And then what that showed me is that, well, this was decades of programming.
Yes.
That you didn't see, you didn't know, and maybe even the person themselves, and maybe even I didn't know these kind of fundamental principles and beliefs that I held that made me take the position that I did, and others took the position, and the other group take the position that they did. And so I'm always kind of interested psychologically, how does a person get to?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It helps me in my own philosophy. And there's a sort of kind of empathy where you put yourself, what was Aristotle says, that the mark of a good thinker is the ability to entertain a contrary idea without accepting it. And so I'm always trying to do that and going, how could somebody possibly get to that point?
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of what was the motivation of the book.
Yeah.
Is to do that kind of analysis.
There were moments where I would think it's almost like the badgering, the constant mentally getting beaten down by some of it, where I would find myself going, am I wrong here? Like, am I crazy? Or wait, no, I'm not. They are. But there's moments where it's like, maybe they are right about some of this. It was weird to kind of go through these ups and downs mentally.
Yeah, because I've been wrong about stuff, and I'm constantly doubting myself because I have been wrong. I myself had fallen victim to scientism, even, and brought some of that in, those ideas and problems when I first came into orthodoxy too. It took me some years to kind of get rid of that. So I'm like you, I'm constantly doubting myself. Am I making a mistake here? Could I be wrong?
Mm-hmm.
Why do I think this way? Why does the other person think? I think that's good. I think that's healthy. I don't think the majority of the people actually did that.
No, it didn't appear that way. I mean, there's some of them that are still doubling down. I saw this Twitter war with that doctor that Joe Rogan threw the challenge to. Yeah. And I know he's getting paid and he has financial interest to double down on his position, but he's doing it in front of millions of people that know he's wrong, but whatever, he still doubles down on his, and you can literally play clips of him over and over that were wrong. And he's still like, nope, I was right. So it's
well, that's what's interesting is that friends, family members, colleagues, and by the way, I've gotten the most hate. Almost all of my problems that I've had to deal with the last couple of years is because I took a stand on this.
Mm-hmm.
And I was never rude in person or but I just went to my academic writing, what I do. And it was, you would get from people, Deacon, you shouldn't talk about that stuff in public. And it's really divisive. And I was thinking, I'm like, well, that's weird because the whole issue is divisive. And there's only two positions you can take on it. One position oh, you're the bad guy. You should stop. You should post pictures of cats and stuff like that and stop talking about these because it's really political and divisive. While the other group posting, I got my jab, go out, save lives, and they were getting rewarded.
Mm-hmm.
Like none of those people that were hating on me were saying to these people, you know what, you shouldn't say that either. If it's a divisive issue and that's
right.
Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
So it is a divisive issue and it's political regardless. So, and you can't be positionless. You're either going to take position A or B on that.
Yes.
And then one was saying, you're the bad guys. That when you talk about, no, you're the good guys if you're in group A. And I thought that was really interesting. And that's because group A was the establishment narrative. That's what the universities, all the corporations, the medical establishments, and the government took and said, this is what we're officially endorsing.
Yes.
And that's a type of social engineering too. And we'll use that group, that shame. What is it? Love bomb, the cult tactics. Love bomb and the dopamine hits, the thumbs ups and all that stuff, and then shame for the other. And all we were saying is that it doesn't look like it's good science and this is rash. Like that was my initial, let's analyze this and question it. And you can question it, which is part of what I've written about is a neo-Gnostic system.
Yes.
Conceals its swindle and then creates a system in which the operating system doesn't allow you to ask those certain kinds of questions. Now, it turns out that everything I said, I've been proven right about. All the quote unquote, that conspiratorial and, bad faith arguing and stuff, the mainstream media, John Hopkins, even all these people have come out, all their heroes have come out and basically said what I've been saying for the last 3 years. I've yet to get any apology letters.
Yeah.
So you get usually 3 camps. I have seen people, and to this I applaud them, that have come out and said, I'm sorry, I was wrong. Please forgive me. Some public figures and people who were pushing jabs and all this. And there was I was wrong. That's rare, but I commend them. The other one is just short-term memory or something. It's like, that never happened. I don't know what you're talking about. Or 3, the people that you said, the double downers, where it's like, as Hegel said, if the facts contradict you, the facts be damned. Right? It's just, you keep going with the lie. Don't concede. Anyways, what you had brought up Joe Rogan and Dr. Hotez and RFK and debate. Now, what's interesting about this is it was starting to swing the other way. Like, hey, look, we overestimated. It really wasn't what we thought it was. The face things don't work, weren't effective at causing health problems, and the jabs are ineffective and dangerous. And I was like, that's good. People are waking up to see what's going on with the Hotez. Now it's going back the other way. So the double downers, and then what you have is you have the corporate elites and the institutions propping them up, which is telling me something else is coming up. I think something's going to, more than likely, what we went through the last 2 years from 2020 to 2022 was kind of a beta test.
Yes.
To probably see how people react, what they can get away with, how that kind of stuff. I don't know. I'm always kind of shocked. I kind of have a general idea what's like something's coming. I'm always kind of shocked or surprised at the details. I'm like, oh, that's interesting. But anyways, just tying back to what you said about it's like they lie.
Yeah.
They know they're lying, and they know that that they're lying, and they keep lying.
Yeah, it's bizarre. That whole experiment on Twitter was fascinating. And then you would see these articles from establishment sources like The Atlantic, I believe, and it's like, why he shouldn't debate RFK and things of this nature. And it's so blatantly silly it doesn't even take a red pill lens to view this anymore. It's just kind of a normal person can see the ridiculousness of the entire thing.
Yeah. And let's tie this back to scientism, because this is what actually happened when I was arguing with people online. And by the way, a lot of people think that's fruitless. I work my arguments out and refine them publicly.
Yes.
And so a lot of what I wrote was from in the book were things that I had worked out, arguing and debating with people on Twitter and Facebook and stuff like that. Now it's hard. You have to, be in control of your passions and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
But one thing that I noticed, and you probably noticed this as well, is that the fallacy of, and it was a type of, I don't know if it would, I guess, qualify as a appeal to authority, but the battle of qualifications.
Yes.
Which is what you're seeing with Hotez right here. So it was really interesting that people were like, well, you're not a virologist. You're not a biologist. You're not a scientist. And this is where you see the scientist. The society and academia and the elites have decided that these are going to be the gatekeepers. They're the ones that, these are the only ones that can speak on that. The problem is they're often in the worst position to do actually good work. Why? Because the way academia has gone, the last 150 years is a specialization where the disciplines aren't talking to each other.
Right. Yes.
And so they elevate, well, I'm a biologist and I don't need to because that's a type of kind of scientism. And yet they do terrible science because they don't know how to analyze, is this good science? It's just, it's a sort of kind of like an echo chamber, right? I'm in my echo chamber, and this is just what I was programmed in the university to say and think. So it was interesting. Anybody else is not allowed to qualify. So we have to, which is interesting. That means that everybody else, do you notice a kind of priestly caste? Nobody has access to this. And it's a type of kind of Gnosticism, right?
Yes. Yep.
That only I, the priest, has the witch doctor, has the special knowledge to this. And you're just going to have to blindly believe me in this. And this is basically what happened. Oh, and if you're another thing, you can't question. So everybody's ignorant because nobody's gone and done a PhD in virology, biology, and all this different stuff. But then you're not allowed to question it. So it was really interesting that I brought up, I'm like, actually, I am. I'm a philosopher of science. So my qualifications trumps yours. And it drove people crazy when I would give them that argument. I'm like, because you're just doing slave labor. You're a biologist, you're just doing slave labor. But you don't actually, when it comes to knowledge and whether that's a good science, you're going out of bounds. You're not actually qualified to. So you can turn that back on them. But I've noticed, and you're seeing it right here with Dr. Hotez, that you're not allowed access in here. Access denied because you don't have the special permit that was given to me by the brainwashing institution. Anyways, that's part of scientism as well.
Can you get more into that Gnostic? I wanted to ask you about the Gnosticism elements of scientism, because once I think it might have been once I read this book and writings by you, I couldn't not see it anymore. Like it's so blatant. Can you talk about that and maybe kind of give a quick brief summary of what Gnosticism is and then how it relates to what we're talking about?
Yeah, I'll just pop up some notes. Okay, so I'm pulling from Vogelin's book right here, Science, Politics, and Gnosticism.
Yes.
Vogelin gives six characteristic traits of Gnosticism. One, it must be first pointed out, he says that the Gnostic is dissatisfied with his situation. And it goes on to say, like, well, that's not particularly surprising in itself. We all have reasons not to be completely satisfied with one aspect or another of the situation we find ourselves in. So it's when you take all these 6 points together. So that was number one. Two, not quite so understandable, is the second aspect of the Gnostic attitude. The belief that the drawbacks of the situation can be attributed to the fact that the world is intrinsically poorly organized. For it is likewise possible to assume that the order of being, so the out there, the as it is given to us men, whatever origin is to be sought, is good. Because we as Christians believe that, right? God created the world, what he says, it's good. And that we human beings are the ones that are in it. Why is it all messed up? Because we sin.
Mm-hmm.
But Gnostics are not so inclined to discover that human beings in general, and they themselves in particular, are inadequate. If in a given situation something is not as it should be, then the fault is to be found in the wickedness of the world. Number 3, the third characteristic is the belief that salvation from the evil of the world is possible. 4, from this follows the belief that the order of being will have to be changed in a historical process. From a wretched world, a good one must evolve historically. The assumption is not altogether self-evident because the Christian solution might also be considered, namely, that the world throughout history will remain as it is and that man's salvational fulfillment is brought about through grace in death. Interesting. 5, with this 5th point, we come to the Gnostic trait in the narrow sense, the belief that the change in the order of being lie in the realm of human action. The salvational act is possible through man's own effort. 6, if possible, however, so to work a structural change in the given order of being that we can be satisfied with as perfect one, then it becomes the task of the Gnostic to seek out a prescription for such change. Knowledge or gnosis of the method of altering being is the central concern of the Gnostic. As the 6th feature of the Gnostic attitude, therefore, we recognize the construction of the formula for self and world salvation as well as the Gnostic's readiness to come forward as the prophet. Here I am. I'm the biologist. Here, I'm the Fauci. I'm the so-and-so that will claim that his or her knowledge about the salvation for mankind. So you can find that kind of summarized as I did from Vogelin's book here. And to really just kind of bring this back home, I'd made this point. So notice what they did. They started censoring even searches. In fact, what's really interesting, I've never had this before. I really did my homework and research, as you can see in the footnotes. And I didn't use the people on my side. I used John Hopkins, World Health Organization, various people that they would basically say that, yeah, that's who they quoted. I'm like, then I'll use them. They're gone. Half those, if you try to look it up, they've taken all that data down. I've never experienced that in my life. Isn't that amazing? So that's what's good. You'll see in there that website was accessed at this point. So they're censoring. They're hiding exactly what they said they would. They're hiding their crime. They're hiding any contrary evidence. And what was the big thing? Fact checkers, right? During this time.
Yeah.
Conspiracy theories and false information is a danger to our democracy and to our life. This is killing people. We're going to be the gatekeepers of doing that. Now, what I found so odd about, I'm like, wait a minute. When did you guys become so concerned with fact? I thought you were relativists. You believe in the objective.
Yes.
There is the crack right there. That's the game they're playing. They're Gnostic. That's what I was talking about, is that Gnostic. It's an attempt to actually construct this kind of system and then pretend that it's actually knowledge, even though I deny that underneath that knowledge. Why? Because they've rejected the created order. Knowledge will be defined how I define it within my system. That's what's true. What I say is
yes
in the system.
Yeah. And that's funny. You walked me right into this. That's the postmodern element to some of this. I wanted to ask you about that too. Because it seems also once you see the postmodernist element of a lot of it, it's hard to unsee.
Yeah, so that idea, and I've talked about this in other papers, contrasting that like postmodernity, and I still think it's modernity. It's just different phases of modernity.
Yeah.
Like we're thoroughly moderns. We're just in a different era of modernity than early modernity, mid-modernity, the Enlightenment. But if we contrast it to the Enlightenment, I want to read you something else that I wrote. The Enlightenment had this kind of optimism, hence the term enlightenment. We're enlightened now. We now know. We have science, and we've thrown off the shackles of religion, and we're using science to perfect. We'll end wars. We'll heal diseases, right? Let me just get this pop up real quick because I've got a great quote for this. So kind of summarize that. Because postmodernity will basically be kind of, if the Enlightenment was this optimism, postmodernity is kind of this black pill despair.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a reason why. Is this 1 second?
There's certainly a nihilistic element to.
Yeah, it's a kind of nice, and it's because of the failures of the Enlightenment, actually.
Mm-hmm.
So the postmodern is interesting. Like they've got actually a lot of valid points, but they remain groundless. Like they have nowhere to kind of put that. Like everything's deconstructed, and so there's kind of a despair. But that makes society and individuals ripe for manipulation. You see what I mean?
Yes.
1 second.
There's almost no protective bumper rails that you can knock up against. Their borders are gone, and it kind of anything can flow in and out. Yeah, it's completely ripe for manipulation.
Okay, so man, I must have wrote this a while back. Let's see. Anyways, go on. I'll keep looking for.
You kind of walked me into what else I wanted to ask you too, is the post-Enlightenment issues. I mean, the world's ripe with those issues, but how do you see modern, let's say Western Christianity affected by some of the issues from the post-Enlightenment period?
Sorry, ask that question again. How do I
know that's kind of a deep one. Post-Enlightenment, the West, how has that had negative impacts on Christianity?
One of the things that you see, and Patrick and I have talked about this too, is that, I mean, again, all this stuff starts in the Enlightenment and modernity itself, but the idea of mechanization of nature, that there's no kind of objective essences of what things are.
Mm-hmm.
And so then nature's itself is ripe for manipulation. It's a machine. You manipulate it, right? You do these. So there's kind of this will to power kind of already written into modernity. And when those projects actually fail, so the boundaries, right? One of the things is that hierarchy is destroyed. Boundaries are destroyed. Like what something is destroyed. And this is part of what sets up for this Gnosticism. It's a will to power. I set up the system to say what it is. Now, how does this affect Christianity? Is that the boundaries are actually kind of blurred about, for example, women's role within the church, moral issues, theological issues too. It's confused now. The boundaries, we've been conditioned in this kind of postmodern system that's rejected all the things that typically we would make that clear. And as you had said, there's no kind of bumper. Mm-hmm. There's kind of to push back against that. So for the average individual in Christianity at large, these things get all mixed up. Like, who am I to? I mean, so you see it all the time. Who am I to say? Who am I to judge on?
Yes.
Shouldn't a woman be able to serve in the altar too? And I think that's the most kind of evident thing that we've seen, kind of the fallout of this kind of post-modernity affecting Christianity in a negative way.
Mm-hmm. What's up, guys? Your host and humble narrator, Buck Johnson here. And you might notice this recording sounds different than the usual podcast. And that is because I'm sitting outside here in Lockhart, Texas, recording this ad into my iPhone. It probably sounds pretty crappy. Well, I'm doing this to show you something very cool. Many of you guys know that my production team works over at Podsworth Media, and they've been producing my show for quite a while. I get a lot of questions and people asking, who does your podcast? Why does it sound great? And I'm telling you why. It's because the guys at Podsworth are amazing. They've got this brand new online app for taking rough recordings like this and making them a whole lot cleaner and more listenable with just a few easy clicks. It will remove background noise. It reduces plosives. It fixes clipping, which is distortion from recording with the gain up too high. Clipping, which is distortion from recording with the gain up too high, which I can promise you I've done many times, and they fixed this for me. It removes clicks and pops. And then also levels out the dialogue, so there's no crazy where the guest sounds too loud or the interviewer sounds too quiet. Here's what you guys can do. All of y'all that are interested in recording podcasts or audiobooks or anything, if you're a pastor and you want your sermon recorded, whatever the case may be, go to podsworth.com and click Get Started. You drag and drop your audio files or click to open your file manager. This also works on your smartphone's web browser. You customize your settings that you want, but the default works fine on most podcast recordings. Then enter code BUCK50, BUCK50 for 50% off of your first order. You don't need an account, just an email address and payment. And you'll get a download link in your email for your cleaned up files. How cool is this? The guys at Podsworth run everything they do through this app before they do anything else to it. So all of my recordings go through this app that we're talking about. It works great. Like I said, any spoken word recordings, obviously for podcasts, YouTube videos, sermons, audiobooks, whatever, it will make awful recordings sound listenable and much more professional. So, like I said, go to podsworth.com and click Get Started. You can use promo code BUCK50, BUCK50 for 50% off of your first order. You can use promo code BUCK50, BUCK50 for 50% off of your first order. Let's get it. There's almost a will to use modern, the way we view society today and try to imprint that on something from Christ's and go, well, that's not really right what Christ did here or what this apostle said. If you think about it like in today's terms, I mean, that sounds pretty messed up, doesn't it? And I see that very, very often, even with Orthodox people sometime, where there's this struggle to embrace certain parts of Orthodoxy because it's like, wow, I mean, that sounds kind of dumb nowadays, don't you think? I've seen that many times.
It came up the other day, the debate. Person was asking about homosexuality and was like, do you Orthodox pray the gay away? It was like that. It's not how it really kind of works, but, and then I thought, I'm like, this is all just kind of wrong-headed. I'm like, neither in antiquity nor in Christianity was there ever a thing called homosexuality. There was no identity. The heterosexual people with different problems with passions and desires and stuff that could get out of control and certain sexual acts, but there was no homosexuality. You see that people use liberals will use this and be like, see, Christ and Paul doesn't conduct homosexuality. Well, there was no term homosexuality because there was no identity. There was what was called contrary to nature, which didn't just include what we would think of like same-sex sexual, but a whole host of different things. So they just had that with under kind of sexual problems, basically, and passions out of control. Anyways, I'd mentioned that, and he was like, well, that's because the person comes back and says, well, that's because they didn't have psychologists then. Oh. And I'm like, well, thank God.
Yeah, right.
The world was a better place. But doesn't that kind of reveal exactly what we're talking about?
Yes.
That it's this kind of scientism is that, well, I call it the we now know fallacy. We now know. We now have psychologists and scientists, and we now have sociologists that can explain this. We now have textual critics that can tell us. I heard a professor, I couldn't believe it, this theology professor told me the other day, and I was thinking about something else, and I should have came back to it, but I didn't think about it until later in the day, what this professor had said. I'm like, what? He said, we now know Matthew didn't write the Gospel of Matthew. I should have been like, how could you possibly know that?
Right. Yeah.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
And please don't tell me textual criticism. That is the biggest joke of what they treat it as actually a science. It's changing all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And, we have Polycarp as early as Polycarp saying Matthew wrote it. And then I thought about something interesting too. The Gospels are the only writings that say the Gospel according to who?
Yeah, right.
None of the other stuff even say that, like the epistles or something.
Right.
It says the Gospel according to Matthew. So I'm like, I'm not buying, but it's more of this kind of futurism and
Yes.
we now know fallacy.
Mm-hmm. I come from early on Protestantism, and then a long stint of atheism, and now Orthodox. But maybe I'm wrong. I thought we were the only ones that say this is the gospel according to St. John. I mean, my priest, you hear it every Sunday. I don't think that Protestants say this is the gospel according to, they certainly don't say saint, but they wouldn't say Matthew. I could be wrong. And I know, as Father Turbo says, the clickety-clack, I'll get it in the comments if I am wrong. But I have never heard that until I went to an Orthodox church, interestingly enough.
Yeah, we'll have to fact check that. I'll have my guys. Can we get a fact check over here?
Fact check on aisle 3.
We now know. We now use science to actually determine if that's true. What else was I going to say?
Did you ever find that quote?
Oh, yeah. Hold on 1 second.
We can jump back to that too.
Because what I wanted to talk to you about was, this is driving me crazy. This is what happens when you do too much writing. I'm not very organized about how I know it's a Sophia paper that I gave. But what I was saying, because you were talking about, I'm going to grab the book that I'm referencing.
Yeah, go ahead.
I pulled it up the other day. Now, of course, when you want it, you can't find it. But this is really kind of right here. One of my mentors, the late reader Tristan Engelhardt, and maybe I could just even find the kind of quote. But it talks about, because notice what it says after God. So he's really talking about postmodernity. So modernity is after Christianity. Now we're at the phase where it's after God. And he talks about living in the rings of Christendom, and has a really good whole thing about kind of postmodernity. Anyways, keep going. I'll find it.
I want to talk more about, there was this, I guess, trope, if you will, focusing on the common good, right? That's what science is supposed to do. It seems like there's possibly an element, I mean, I guess there is, of our fallen human nature with corrupting science, and then, but kind of covering it with, let's say, well, we focus on the common good. I think scientism in itself, by its very nature, can't be grounded in objective morality. What are your thoughts on that?
Are you saying contemporary science? Yeah,
contemporary science, right? But there's this trope that's what it is. This is for the good. This is for the good. But it seems like it's ungrounded.
Well, that's what Tristan Engelhardt talks about in here, because this is the morality and bioethics in a secular age. And there's this whole thing of it's actually really relevant to what we're talking about. Let's have medicine in a pluralistic society. And this is really kind of definitely modern. Well, let's just take the lowest common denominator. We have all these different religions and different politics. And can we all just get along?
Yes.
Can we all just have a science together that doesn't offend another person? Or can we all have a political state that doesn't can we all do this? And it can't. Like, that's what he points out. These systems are incommensurate, especially when you get into like bioethics, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you're pointing out something like secularism itself, like science came out of Christianity.
Mm-hmm.
Science in Latin means scientia, and Greek episteme means knowledge. And it's knowledge because it was grounded in the transcendent conditions for the possibility of knowledge and the order of being, and that's God. So modernity and secularism that severs that, you can no longer call it knowledge. There is no ethics. Like it's like you said, it's groundless.
Mm-hmm.
And we can't just be like, well, how do we all make everybody happy? We'll just do this lowest kind of common denominator. And that doesn't work because, we have a particular notion of what the human being is and life and when, what you can do that other people don't. So they're incompatible. And that's the position that he takes with that. So yeah, excellent question.
Thank you. It's I didn't even know it was the part of the topic of that book, strangely enough. But I want to talk to you or ask you about managerial society, technocratic rule, because one of the themes I kept noticing in the last few years is that there was almost a willingness for many people just to say, look, these people, this very small elite group, let them rule us. And in fact, there was, since that issue that we lived through was worldwide, it was the first time where I started seeing a willingness to ignore national boundaries to this extent. We've always seen the push to eliminate them and whatnot with the United Nations even. And, I grew up listening to Alex Jones in Austin, Texas. So I've heard this for a long time, but this seemed to be, since it affected quote unquote everybody, this was the first time I thought there's really a strong push for a kind of a technocratic elite to rule over everyone. And a lot of people were willing to go, yes, please.
I know. Yeah. That's just kind of who's pushing back. There was a professor that was like, that sounds conspiratorial. So there's one group of people up there working. I'm like, no, it's that they share, there are various groups and nations that unfortunately share common ideas and goals. And there's this kind of cronyism that occurs from that, where I think it's no coincidence that prior to that, what is intolerant, right? They move this into, even like they try to tie it to racism or something like that, but you can't be a nationalist. Like, that was attacked early on. And perhaps it was attacked because a strong nation state is the only thing that's an obstacle to globalism, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so maybe that actually needed to be attacked and brought down because of the coup that was going to happen. And now there's no boundaries. We all have this, and you have these, the World Health Organization, and you have all these different kind of groups, UNESCO, like all these that are these kind of internationalism, right? And Davos, and they all talk about basically, these obstacles to, and it's planning from top down. It's certainly a Gnostic system. We will cure all diseases, all social ills, all of these things through planning and constructing, right? Yeah, sure it is.
That's the managerial aspect of it, of course.
The managerial, yeah. Here, I found let me pop up the managerial. But yeah, you really noticed that during the coup, right?
Yes.
That they're all kind of cooperating. And, I talked about that in the book. I'm just trying to find the Parliament of Experts. And that the old way of thinking is that politicians control, right? And then you get to participate that in democracy. I just wrote something the other day. I'm like, what a parlor trick democracy. Not that democracy's ever been good. It's, out of all the Western thinkers, they thought, throughout history, they thought that's the worst form of government. But it's kind of like opium for the masses, right?
Yes.
You make the people think that they're participating and have some control, and they'll settle down.
Mm-hmm.
They'll be satiated. And I forget, it's often wrongly attributed to Benjamin Franklin, but it was she was an anarchist. Blanking on her name.
So am I. I know exactly who you're talking about, though. Yes.
If voting actually did something, they would have made it illegal.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just really normie, I call it, to think that like politicians are actually doing something and you have some participatory, efficacy in that.
Yeah.
It's like, no, it's the elites, it's the technocrats. And that's why it was so important for me to talk about the managerial society and what technocracy actually is, and then tie that into Scientism and neo-Gnosticism. But it's that idea, right, that we will plan everything, and all the social ills, all the medicine, and for always, like you said, for the common good.
Mm-hmm. It's always that.
But those choices are not made by elected people. It's, as I point out, by a handful of men in a world of close politics and secret scientific choices. So notice that goes back to our first thing. You're not allowed in this sphere.
Mm-hmm.
You weren't given the badge for that. Only, and again, that's reminiscent of like almost like mystery religions and cults and stuff like that too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Were there parts of this, we'll call it the last 3 years, that seemed to you like an attack on the church? Not churches across the country. I mean, literally at the church.
Absolutely, I think it was. Father Turbo used that video where you were interviewing, what's her face?
Dr. Naomi Wolf.
Yes. And surprisingly, you wouldn't think that she would actually say that. But she called it, and she didn't mean it, as far as I took it, you could tell me too. She wasn't meaning it in kind of Jordan Peterson archetypical evil, but a real incarnational present evil.
Yes.
To explain that. And I think we're all just kind of shocked that, and it was so great that you had her on. Like, here, somebody woke up and saw, despite whatever her presuppositions that would have blinded her to maybe not answer, somehow she saw past that and she saw it as it really was, which I thought was amazing. And Father Turbo said, it's evil. That's exactly what was, and it attacked the church. But it was a blessing too.
Yes. Well, it brought me to the church.
Yeah.
And I mean, I look back, and you never know how things go. This is kind of a counterfactual, but I'm not sure that I would have become Orthodox without the events of 2020 and 2021, et cetera. I probably would have at some point, because Christ calls us in different ways, but that was certainly the way that I was called. Did you see a swelling up of members and interest in patristic faith and stuff like that during these times?
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's why I wrote the title that I did, In Whom Do You Put Your Trust? And Father Turbo talked about that too. It was such a blessing. Like, look how many people came in. Look how much stuff was revealed. Look how much stuff's getting put back right.
Yes.
We can't be black-pilled about that. Like, it's God allows evil. There's a scripture, all things that work for good for those who trust in God. And I think that's the way we got to see it, is that if you think about the story of Job, the devil and all demons actually have to get, in order to do something, they have to go to the divine council and actually get permission from God. God could veto any action. God's providence holds over everything, even the bad stuff. Now, why would he possibly allow evil? Because it's a trap for the devil, right? The greatest enemy was death. This is why this book is called Let No One Fear Death. And that's what the devil had. He had the pit. He had Sheol, right? He had that which was created in the image of God in his mouth. And he held all of that. That was his dominion, was death, was Hades. And it was terrible. That's a terrible thing. And what does Christ do? He allows an evil, namely, he allows death, and then he allows himself to die, who's life himself. And if you notice, it leads exactly to the herring of Hades. And why did he do that? Because it's a trap of the devil. The devil and his pride was not able to realize, here's another soul coming in that I'll actually be able to hold into my mouth and have dominion over man. But it was the God-man. So you know that, who is this King of glory, right? When you're knocking on and the devil's tricked, lets Christ in through something evil, through his own death. And the devil bites down, right? Thinking he's going to hold that. And he bites down on a jawbreaker, breaks his jaw, and Christ breaks out, right? And brings eternal life to everybody. And so if you think about the coup is something similar to that was authorized, and it was authorized as an attack on the church this is being mounted by the devil itself. And it's not a spiritual meaning of evil. It's not archetypical. It's literally demonic. That's why it's nice in the Our Father that we end with, and deliver us instead of from the evil one. It's personified. And I think this was personified, and the devil thought that he got us. He canceled Paschas. He got people to stop venerating icons. He got people to fear death and cast their eyes away from Christ. And God authorized that. Why? To save people. Look at all the people coming in. Look at everything that's cleared up and made. So as hard as it is, I don't have any regrets that it happened. But yes, to answer your question, it attacked the church. That in fact, that was probably the evil one's primary goal.
Yeah, I didn't want to bring Father Turbo up because he tells me things sometimes personally. But yeah, that I asked you that question because of a conversation that he and I had on this exact topic, and it sounds like he kind of discussed it at Orthodox Montana. So it's,
that's exactly what I remember. What paper? The Dangers of Technology was a paper that I wrote and delivered in IOTA, the first IOTA in Romania. And that was, when was that? So 4 years ago? So you can see that and you can see that God must have been prepping me, because I was already concerned about, so the title of the paper is An Eastern Orthodox Understanding of the Dangers of Modernity and Technology. 2018.
You had a crystal ball.
So I was already worried about stuff. But you'll like this quote. Tristan Clark says, in eschewing a God's eye perspective, morality, bioethics, the state, and the meaning of life are all approached as if everything came from nowhere and we're going nowhere, and for no enduring or ultimate purpose. Isn't that what you just said?
Yes.
Yeah. And this is the part that I'm just going to read from, if you don't mind.
Go ahead, please.
This is my own. Not only is secularism not a neutral position, it is a culture both hostile to God, and my cats are fighting at the... It's hostile to God and incompatible with Orthodox Christianity. So I'm bringing this up because it's answering the question that you had, that you remember you even started with the common good.
Yes. Can
we actually have a science of bioethics, politics that is a common good? And I'm going to answer that with this. Well, this is exactly what the Enlightenment's actually trying to do. and aspiring to create a universal ethics in terms of a Kantian paradigm that would be binding on all humanity, rational universal religion and morality, a secular religio catholica. That was the Enlightenment's project upon all humanity, which were the inheritors. But as Nietzsche predicted, to replace God with an idealized vision of man and mankind. And although this universal religion, we hope to eliminate wars. So here's the optimism that I was telling you about. Conflicts and bloodshed by substituting the secular rationality and morals for God. It nevertheless brought about precisely the opposite. And the quote here that I referenced in the footnote, secular reason from Tristan Mangelhardt, what did the Enlightenment actually bring us? This whole idea that they were trying to do that was so optimal. That sounds great. Universal secular religion and morality and science and all this stuff. Oh, well, guess what it brought about? The French Revolution, reign of terror, and eventually the slaughter of millions by the secular rationalist regimes of Stalin, Mao, Pol Pot, in the pursuit of supposedly a philosophically justified moral vision that had its own secular bioethics.
Yes.
So that's where postmodernity at least has the insight. It's like, I know what you did. I know what happened, and it's bad. But they're groundless. They don't know. They're like these young men that are all black-pilled, right?
Yes.
It's like they realize the problems. They don't know how to solve it.
Yeah.
So you're not left with anything coherent.
Yes.
There's no coherent concept of what science, what community, or what it means to be human, male or female, right? This is why everybody, and they all turn on each other. I don't know if you noticed this.
Yes.
That it's like, oh no, that's not what you're supposed to say. That's not like, nobody knows what they're supposed to say. Like it came out of nowhere. Like I said, it's groundless, not going anywhere. There's nothing coherent about it. And so every group within a group starts to actually attack each other. Hey, because it's groundless.
Yes, which is where you get the left will eat their own. Because
yes, that's a perfect, way to. Anyways, I finally found it. Forgive me that it took so long, but I thought that was really apt to.
Yes. Yeah. You mentioned it within that technology, and as this episode drops, my previous episode was on transhumanism, AI, technology, etc. Just out of curiosity regarding those topics, do you think AI itself is evil, or is it just a tool like a hammer, and it can do good things, we can do bad things? It's nebulous almost, or neutral, or is it actually evil?
It's a great. Did you see, I don't know if you saw this post, but I found a couple days ago, there's an AI antichrist that you can ask questions on, I forget what platform it's on. So I'm going to read something else. So I think there's something extremely problematic with AI, but not with technology in general.
Okay.
So let me just read this quote for you again. It's from Abbas Emilianos, Archimandrite from Mount Athos. He says, technology per se is not, of course, harmful, being the fruit of reasoning and intellect of man, who is formed in the image of God. But when unrestrained and unbridled, it rushes headlong towards its destination, then it becomes luciferious, though not bearing light, but rather pitch darkness. The danger for us is the absence of accountability in the way in which technology is administered and exploited, a way which has as its aim the shifting domination of human life and the solution of problems by technical means, regardless of moral or metaphysical principles. So, end quote. That's what, and Heidegger talks about this too. Techne is, the Greek word is like the tool, the artisan, right? Where you get like technique and all this different stuff. And the better I get with my tool, that's technology. And that itself is what Heidegger says, like ready at hand, and toolness and stuff like that. That's not bad. But Heidegger talked about like worrying about a technological age in which the tool slips out of the hands of the artisan and becomes something else, which is exactly kind of what Archimandrite Emilianus is talking about. The lack of accountability. Well, there's nothing. What's the lack of accountability? Well, it's not grounded in the correct moral metaphysical principles. And then it slips out and it becomes uncontrollable, which is exactly, I think, what you're seeing with AI. This is why you had that dude just step down, was like,
yeah,
from the chat GTP, it's like, this is crazy. Like, and part of this reflects the kind of neo-Gnostic scientism. Once you reject like that proper framework, once you reject Christianity, then it's just you and a libido dominandi, right? Well, I can construct it. I can do it. So there's no question about should I do it? Those are kind of the old metaphysical and moral kind of questions that you find in Christianity. Everything, and there's no telos, right? So everything is, the end becomes the means because I can make it. And I think this is what's happened with AI. There's no kind of framework or grounding in which, might this be a bad idea? And you're seeing this with the gender issues and like, and just, I'd say even education in general, and things with children. It's a big experiment. Nobody has a foundation to be like, this could be seriously problematic. Let's do it. I think this is what you're finding out with AI. And then now the genie's out of the bottle, Pandora's box is opened, and it's uncontrollable. Exactly what Heidegger says. The tools left because now what we see is professors, we don't know what to do with exams and papers because the kids are using chat GTP, and it's getting better. In fact, we played games, educational games, where I was trying to learn from this. In my philosophy of science class this year, where I was having them plug in questions in chat GTP and seeing what it would say. And one was hilarious. I actually got to break it. Like, I'm like, okay, I was starting to figure out. So we have this Bayesian probability theory that people use in actually they use it in law. It's not just science too, and economics and different stuff like that. And then we were doing a critique in philosophy of science. Yeah, but is it really like that successful? Like, how successful is? And what you notice is that it's grounded on all these presuppositions. Only if my presuppositions are right, but then my presuppositions are actually written in to calculating the probabilities, the Bayesian probability theory. So then I got this crazy idea. I'm like real meta idea. I'm like, what happens if you plug the Bayesian probability theorem back into itself? Like, how probable is the Bayesian probability theory when if you plug it into the Bayesian probability theory? Students started laughing. Then I was like, you know what? That is a very human, creative type of question. That's what I thought. And I'm like, ask chat GTP that question. It had the stupidest answers. And I was like, got it.
Got it. Yeah.
I'm like, I got it. I broke it. I broke the machine. But the thing is, the more you play with it, the more you ask it, it will adapt. Then it started giving better answers. And I was like, And this is what's happening is that, first with the papers and exams, I'm like, just ask really abstract philosophical things that only humans can do. But it's getting better at that. It just mix and matches these pieces. So now we don't know how to do assessment.
Wow.
That's one problem. Number two, it's abolishing human work.
Yes.
I talked to my buddy who's a lawyer. He's like, do we use it for law to write up stuff? it saves so much time. And my wife, who used to be a lawyer too, she was like, so nobody needs to go to law school anymore. I'm like, oh, that's a great point.
Jeez.
Well, chat GTP. So it's eliminating work.
Mm-hmm.
And then what the third thing that I think he brought up too, criminals are using it to get data and case things. And that's where it's like, it's gone out of control. Like you can't stop. Now you get AI, Jesus, Antichrist. People are literally going to, so I do think it's evil. I think that there's a certain kind of possession that's taken over. And there's something just in the very nature of modern technology that's akin to demonic. Because what is this modern technology? They're messages, right? What is angelos, messenger? So you have good messages and bad messages. And notice those messages aren't bound to any physical locale, right? It's not like I've got my letter and I've got my horse out here and I'm going to ride it to the next town to deliver the, right? I'm bound by being embodied in the spatio kind of temporal. And this is getting to, I have these really long answers, but I always find that the most entertaining and adventurous is not the shortest distance between 2 points, but a long, windy road that I eventually get to, which is transhumanism is transcending the matter into the noetic realm, of which that message and those bad messages, I don't even want you to look at the AI Antichrist, because the stuff people were asking him, the AI, but it's transcending matter. These messages can be affecting, infecting, and possessing both people's minds in different places at different times, all at the same time. What does that sound like? Demonic, right? Like that's what demons do.
You're right.
They're not bound by like, well, it's going to take me 3 days.
Yes.
To get this tempting message over to, little Johnny over there in Austin, Texas. Yeah, it's immediate. It's just like, so I think the medium itself is fertile for demonic because it has a very similar nature too. So there is a sort of possession that's the demons are taking advantage of it. They're like, oh, that's our realm.
Yes.
I know how to do this, right? That's basically my thoughts on that.
Well put. Yeah, that certainly makes sense to me. I guess I've kept you some while now. I'd like you to plug or talk about anything you'd like as far as Patristic Faith, anything y'all got coming out, your online presence, anything you'd like.
Yeah, so the biggest thing coming up is the men's retreat. And like I said, you can find that on Patristic Faith events. And I'm really excited about that. It's going to be different than it's like a formal conference. We're going to be dealing with men's issues. The title is "Your Brother is Your Life," which is a quote from Saint Sophronius. But how do we be Orthodox men as a father, as a brother, is working in the secular world? So it's not just tailored to young men, which I will be giving a talk and doing breakout groups with the young men. How do I be a young man in this crazy world? How do I date, right? Like, how do I not be black-pilled? And how do I do all this stuff? How does a man fit these various roles in a secular society as an Orthodox Christian? I think that's what everybody needs. And I've assembled all-star team to basically help with that. And some of these talks we may even do hiking through the monastery. I don't want the idea of just like a conference, you know what I mean? We're just all sitting, listening passively.
Right.
What if we're out walking through the beautiful hills and mountains of Montana on a monastery, doing manly thing like that, chopping wood. As we talk about Christological, incarnational, Trinitarian theology that will heal men and give them a guide through all these various aspects of life that are becoming so confused. As you brought up, Postmodernity, because of the fault of modernity and enlightenment, has blurred all the boundaries. It's mixed everything up. It's broken, right? And we're living in that.
Yes.
And we need light. We need guidance from, and we need healing. And that's what the Orthodox Church can bring. And that's what the men's retreat is going to do. So I know people are kicking themselves. They weren't able to make the tremendously successful Orthodox Montana. Well, here's your opportunity to actually make that up and actually experience that. So you can find that. It's August 11th through 13th, Holy Trinity in Butte. You can find that event on, and we need men to sign up. Get out there. Tell people in your parish, guys, let's man up and learn how to be men together in fellowship and community. So that's my plug on that. Other than that, help us out, subscribe to, sign up on Patristic Faith. Consider giving a charitable contribution, helps us keep things going, paying, running for the sites and doing all these various things. And then also what I'm thinking about doing too, I'm probably going to put this on Patristic Faith is kind of a separate thing from Patristic Faith itself. But I'd like to actually sell at a discounted rate, my university lectures series.
Great. Okay.
Yeah. So I've got political philosophy. I've got philosophy of science. I've got epistemology, ethics, logic, and intro. So six different courses of roughly 16 weeks. They're university courses sold to. I think that'll be really cool if I can package that up. I've already kind of, I want to call it the black market, but not advertised.
Yeah.
Had sold some of this, and they get better and better. So that's my last plug, basically. And just pray for all of us in Montana. There's some great things that we really do feel, the priests up here and the parishioners. There is a future for Orthodoxy in America.
Mm-hmm.
It's very new, but something's happening here. Something's going to be made clear. I mean, the fact that we have this beautiful 1,000-acre monastery. And, we're outside of the cosmopolitan, hectic. I mean, Montana itself is kind of very monastic, right? In the sense of being back connected to nature. And just the lovely people up here. There's no, unlike the Gnostic system, there's no centrally planned idea. And the bishop had asked me about this. What is Montana? What is Patristic Faith? And it's like, well, I'll tell you what it's not. It's not a political system. It's not an ideology. It's not another neo-Gnostic system, managerial society, top down. What it is, it's an ethos in Christ. It's a life with your brother, in which, much like virtue ethics, there's no algorithm, there's no answer we can just look up in the book, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like a science book would do. Well, I'll just look up the answer.
Mm-hmm.
What it requires is living with your brother, living in community, working in the parish, right? And then the kingdom of heaven, as you acquire the virtues, becomes clear. There it is. I see it.
Mm-hmm.
That's what we're doing up here in Montana. That's what Orthodox Montana is about. It's announcing the kingdom, and in the participatory way in which it becomes clear. And I think this will be a template for all of America. When we live this way and what's happening here, we're going to actually see, here's the kingdom. Here's the kingdom in America. And we're all really excited. We all really believe that. And even His Grace, Bishop Maxim, said, amen. And I told him, I'm like, well, I was inspired by your paper. It's basically what you said in your paper and presentation. These things, we don't have a dogmatic theology. We don't have an ethics. We don't have a philosophy. We have a life.
Mm-hmm.
We have an ethos.
Yes.
We have dogmas, but they flow upward.
Mm-hmm.
Just like all these guys, what are we going to do about it politically, boys? What system? It's like, it's not how it works.
Right.
The political life, the correct form, emerges out of an Orthodox life, not the other way around. You don't force it down on.
Right.
So that's what we all believe because we're Orthodox.
Yes.
And that's what we believe up here. And that's basically what the mission of Patristic Faith and Orthodox Montana is.
Excellent. Well, I'll link to that in the show notes page for this episode.
Awesome,
Father
brother.
Deacon, thanks so much, man. Thank you.
Yeah. God bless, brother.
You too. All right. I hope you guys enjoyed this chat with Father Deacon Ananias. Go visit Patristic Faith and get this book, Let No One Fear Death. I highly recommend it. That topic is still timely. It is still timely because, let's face it, we might be up against something like that again in the near future. And until next week, you guys have a good one.
You get split in half, but I call the hologram brass. But I am the center inside the placenta of math. You clash with cyanide gas and die fast. Rhythmical equivalent of solids, liquid, and gas. We smash your sinus with the power of Lord Titus. But I am the virus inside of the iris of Cyrus.
Like the sound of the Counterflow podcast? Our audio production is provided by Podsworth Media. Check them out at podsworth.com.